Hello, so counterintuitively, this is the second part of my series of videos giving my presentation about the Persona series of JRPGs and why I am owned by them, despite the fact that they're not actually very good. I mean, that's unfair. They're good, but in terms of story, I feel like they could be better. And that's probably part of why I'm so enamored with them. This is the first modern Persona game. As I said in my previous presentation, Persona and Persona 2, which is secretly two different games, exist. They are not necessarily part of the same continuity as Persona 3, 4, and 5, which is why they're separated out into classic Persona. And I'm going to be covering modern Persona games in my presentations. So we are starting on part 2, Persona 3. I'm so sorry. I feel like I should have arbitrarily added a second part to the presentation that was just like 2 minutes of me singing a song so that this could be part 3. So if you look in the description of the video, I've put a link to the opening theme of Persona 3, which sort of helps set the tone, and I believe I'm including a version that has the lyrics so that you can sort of follow along. The theme of the game is very much based around death, and I'm going to warn you right now, there is a lot of suicide themes and imagery. So if that's something that upsets you, or that you can't deal with, or that triggers you, then please skip this video and go to the next one. I would much rather you skip my 20-odd minute info dump session and be okay. So that's just the heads up on this one. So we're going to start off by talking about the plot and the setting of the game. The game storyline kicks off in 1999 in a fictional Japanese city called Iwatodai. It's a coastal city. It's very much involved with the coast and the sea. There's lots of pretty pan shots of the bay. In 1999, the plot is initiated when an explosion happens at a research facility off the coast. There's some islands there that have been created from reclaimed land from the bay, and there's an explosion on one of them. It not only kills almost all of the staff that were in the area, it also kills some civilians that were on the bridge between the island and the mainland. One of those civilian injured was a young child who is going to grow up to become our protagonist. In this version of it, I've gone with the male protagonist, but there is a female protagonist available in one version of Persona 3. I'll talk more about that later, but just for ease's sake, I'm going with the male protagonist name, which is the manga name Minato, for this recap. So 6-year-old Minato has just been orphaned and doesn't really understand what's going on, but his parents have been killed in this horrible explosion that suddenly happened, and now he's on his own. 10 years later, he has been shuttled around different relatives and foster homes and all sorts of places, and he's finally landed in the exclusive private school in Iwatodai. So he's been moved into the dormitory, and I wouldn't say he's very well. He's very disconnected. He's very antisocial. He's not really interested in making friends or talking to people until the plot kicks off. And now he has to make friends with people or he won't be able to defeat monsters. Yay! I'm afraid to say that Persona is a power of friendship type storyline. It doesn't beat you around the head with it too much, but it's definitely there as a theme. So he arrives in the dormitory, and the very next night, the dormitory is attacked by a terrible monster, and he discovers that he has the power to fight it. So he gets recruited to the school club that fights these monsters, because of course there's one of those. And he spends most nights, especially full moon nights, going around fighting and occasionally recruiting these shadows. This is where the suicide imagery comes in. In order to summon their personas, if you remember basically stands from the previous presentation, they use a model gun that's manufactured in a special way, so it has a special magical cartridge in it. And when they pull the trigger, it forces them to face up to their death, and the stress that it causes allows their persona to manifest. It was developed by the same research group who owned the facility that exploded. Also, there's a tiny little spoiler in grey at the very bottom of the slide there. I've spoiled it because I think it's bullshit, and it shouldn't have happened. I think it, I wouldn't say it undermines the themes of the game, but I feel like it undermines the main character's story arc, so I'm mad about it and I'm going to pretend it never happened. So the core themes of this game and its plot, death, mortality, and suicide are the major ones. Please do not play this game if you are triggered by suicide at all on any level, because the imagery is consistent and pervasive, and the ending also involves it quite heavily. To be fair, I was triggered by Wreck-It Ralph, but Persona 3 didn't trigger me, so your mileage may vary, but be careful, and if it's too much, please don't push yourself to get through it just because I said it's fun. Look after yourself, and there's always 2 other games that don't involve teenagers pointing guns at their heads. There's a lot of themes about how difficult it is to relate to others when you've been through something that they haven't. Pretty much all of the kids in the main cast have some kind of thing in their past that sets them apart from other people. But all of them, in their own way, struggle to relate to their peers, and through the protagonist and through their progression in the main story, they sort of either come around or drift further away from everybody. There's a lot about trying to do the right thing and bad things happening anyway. Life not being fair, things just not being stoppable. Sometimes things just happen and you just have to cope with them, and you can't stop them or change them. There is a conspiracy to uncover. There's lots of full moon and sort of oceans and tides kind of imagery. The social link system, is a sort of social rank up system with your party members and with some of your classmates and people that you meet in the world as well. The available romances there are semi-mandatory. Technically, you don't have to date the people that there's a romance link with, but if you want to max out the social link, you have to continue to date them. You can't do a platonic version of that social link. All of the available romances are heterosexual, so if you play the male character, the romances will be female. If you play the female character, the romances will be male. That does mean that there are some differences in the social links between those 2 characters, and I think if you end up liking the route that you play first and liking one of the characters, can be worth either playing or looking up their social link for the other protagonist, just to see the differences so that you get a different insight into that character. The exception is that the female protagonist can romance the female android, basically. So it's that whole, like, Inhuman makes it okay kind of thing, but at least it's there. So, we're going to talk about the playable characters. I think most of them are very charming. The ones that I've tried to be as level-headed and fair and enthusiastic on the slide as I can, just because they might be your fave, and I don't want to limit anybody. Just because I personally don't have something to my taste doesn't mean that it can't be to your taste. And I tried to make this presentation so that everybody who's interested can find something that they like about it. Also, there's going to be a dog. So we're going to start off with a male protagonist, because he was the first one that was developed and released. He's got massive depression, massive post-traumatic stress. He's very sleepy. He takes naps in class all the time. I find him quite charismatic, and a lot of the characters in game do too, but he's just kind of a gremlin. So he's got that kind of passive charisma where, he acts aloof and everything, and people think that it's because he's really cool, but actually he's just kind of a space case and is half asleep most of the time. At one stage in the story, he does pick up a soulmate, who looks just like him. You can't romance him, but, that's bullshit, so we're just going to pretend that's not the case. There's lots of, covers for the official mangas and everything where they're, definitely coded as being together, so I think it's just nonsense that, they're not. One thing that I really like about him is that he uses his, performative gender role to kind of, mask his issues. He uses the role of a stoic tough guy who's really cool and awesome and doesn't care about anything, in order to hide the fact that he doesn't care about anything. And he's actually really sad and lonely and doesn't really see why he should still be alive, which is tragic. Also, I kin him. Here is the female version of the protagonist. I gave her own slide, not just so I could fit the pictures on, but also because she is characterized differently. Obviously she gets different social links. She gets to romance different characters. She also has a different personality. In the dialogue options that you get to pick from, her dialogue options are a lot more sassy and outgoing and, sometimes kind of vicious. You can try and commit a murder as her. And the male protagonist, he's just yeah, you can go, but with her you can actually try and kill the person, and your party members are the only thing that stop you. I think it's really cool that they let her be angry and, mean sometimes, and that they didn't kind of try and shove her into this box of, a pretty, cute girl. She very much uses the attitude of a Genki girl to mask her issues the same way the male protagonist uses his stoicism to do the same thing. So I think it's really cool that they're basically got the same core issues and they're basically got the same core coping mechanism, but it looks very different based on their gender. She has the same male soulmate as the male protagonist. And they can date each other. But in it, he tells her that he would still like her if she was a boy, and then you can't date him as the male protagonist, which is singularly disappointing. Anyway, party members. So one of the first party members that you meet on the very first night you arrive in the dormitory is Yukari. She's very, hit and miss in the fandom. People either hate her or love her to pieces. There are a few people who are just yeah, I guess she was there. But no one's I've never met anybody who's just kind of yeah, she was cool, without being I would die for her. I would die for her, by the way. So, there's, her backstory is very entwined with the main story. I personally think, she's a really cool example of a female character who, again, like the female protagonist, isn't kind of pushed into a box of being cute and polite all of the time. Especially in the epilogue of the FES version of the game, she makes some decisions that are quite unpopular in the fandom, but I think they're really true to character, and they actually show a lot about her. And I loved her a lot more after I saw her showing in that epilogue than I did before. I'll explain more about the epilogues at the end of the slideshow, but please give her a chance. She's really good. Just because she doesn't immediately like you doesn't mean she's mean or horrible. She's really cool, and she tries really hard for her friends, and I want people to think of her in a positive light if at all possible, because I think she gets a lot of undue flack from the fandom. So Junpei is very outgoing. He's one of the first people who sort of jumps up to the protagonist and is like, "Hi, welcome to the school, how are you doing?" He tries to make sure that, everything's okay, and that the protagonist isn't, lonely, which he is, and the protagonist brushes him off a lot, but Junpei pretty much never gives up, which I admire about him. He doesn't have an English voice actor. It's funny how that happens. Like, there just isn't one. Like, Hatsune Miku voiced him. That's so funny. Mitsuru Kirijo, she is a character who comes back in some later installments in the series, because she's the heiress to a major company. She is a rich bitch. She will step on you. She doesn't take any nonsense, but she also doesn't know how to eat a burger, which is incredible. I genuinely love her. I think that her determination and her sense of responsibility, and her refusal to give in are all really admirable. I think that she's really pretty, and she could kick me and I would thank her. But not even in a creepy way. I would just show everybody the bruise and be like, "Look what Mitsuru gave me, she's so cool." She has a lot of creepy fan art online. Please be careful in Googling her. But in the main game, she's very refined and dignified, and I think that's probably why. In general, her story arc is actually pretty solidly written. She doesn't cut herself down at any point to please people. And she has a Bechdel test passing rivalry with another female party member. So that's genuinely fun. Akihiko is a bit of a meme. You've probably seen his face around if you spend any length of time on JRPG kind of social media. He is very outgoing, less in a social way and more in just a if something needs doing, he'll jump up straight away and run off to do it without necessarily waiting to hear the details. He's very determined and surprisingly chill. But he also has a lot of emotions about protecting people and looking after people, because he lost his sister so young. He has kind of developed a complex about becoming stronger so that he can protect people and make sure he doesn't lose anybody in the future, which is going to end great, by the way. That's going to end great in a game about death and suicide. It's 100% headcanon. It is not canon at all. But a lot of people see him as trans because of the way that he glowed up between the games. So in Persona 3, he tends to wear a t-shirt when he goes swimming. Lots of people think that they can see the outliner of a binder on his key art. And then in the Arena spin-off game that takes place several years later, suddenly he's this like buff, like bear, I guess, almost. He's kind of too skinny, but you know what I mean. And like, I can see it. I can go with that. It fits his storyline. It doesn't interfere with anything. Go for it. So Furuka is really sweet. She's gay, not in canon, but like she is though. She has a lot of elements that JRPG writers tend to put into the cute character. So she has the Gatmoe thing going on with the fact that she can't cook. She gets bullied at school and you have to help her out. She has self-confidence issues. But like, it never comes off as annoying and like wet blankety, because she's got an incredible strength. She never kind of gives up, even when she gives in. I think that, although her story arc isn't one of the ones that's most connected to the main story, it's definitely solid. Also, she's kind of a programming genius. That gets sprung on you at some point. It's not mentioned initially, but then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, by the way, she can do all this cool computer stuff. So I guess she can do cool computer stuff. I'm not complaining. Here is the robot girl. We love her. Her name's Aigis, but she gets nicknamed Toaster a lot in the fandom. She's the best toaster. She has an artificial heart installed so that she can summon a persona, because in order to have a persona, you need to have a personality. She's really awesome. She starts off very emotionless, and she becomes more emotional as the game goes on. She's sort of learning to be a person. Unlike the human characters who are learning to be competent, she's got the competent part down. She's kind of coming at it from the other angle. You can date her as both the male and the female protagonist, and she has Gatling cannons in her hands. It's very important. She is quite central to a lot of the epilogues and spin-offs. She's very important for the main plot. She's cool, and I love her. I love her. Ken Amada is a tiny child. He's literally 10 years old. He's not 1,000 years old in 10 years body. He's not, stunted grit. He's literally just a 10-year-old in the game as a playable character. Which is probably part of how it got such a high certificate, never mind the suicide stuff. He boards at the high school dormitory over the summer holidays so that they don't have to keep the elementary dormitory open. And it turns out that he's got the potential to be a persona user, which is the case for everybody who ends up staying at the dormitory. Spoilers. But if somebody comes to stay the night, they've usually got the potential. There's a couple of exceptions, but if they come to stay at the dorm permanently, that's your next party member. He resists the temptation that a lot of writers fall into of making the child character just be there to be cute. He has a lot of baggage, and he tries to do a murder, by the way, which is very opposite to the whole cinnamon roll thing. He's very sweet, nevertheless. He's got a strong personality. He wants to be helpful. He wants to make the world a better place in general. He just also has a lot of things to contend with in his life. He's doing his best. Also, he gets an emotional support dog, which is important. Here's the dog, by the way. I promised you there would be a playable dog, and there is. It doesn't talk. It's not particularly special. It's just a dog that's playable. as you do. Sort of becomes Ken's emotional support dog after some plot points happen. Backstory for the dog is that it was the familiar of a shrine custodian, and when the shrine custodian passed away, the dog continued to look after the shrine. It's sort of faintly implied that he may be possessed or haunted by his former owner's ghost, but I like the idea that he's just a dog who really wants to help. It has a persona. The dog has a persona. And it's just really cute. Everybody could use a dog, except people that are allergic to dogs. This is Shinjiro. He is a 3rd year, and he's very big and scary. He barely ever attends school. You don't meet him until sort of midway through the game. Don't spend too much money upgrading him, because he does not stick around. He fucks off again. You can date him as the female protagonist, and that changes the end of his storyline, which unfortunately means that as the male protagonist, you have no way of interacting with his storyline. It's sort of on a train track, and there's nothing you can do to interfere with it. Which I think is partly because the female protagonist storyline was written later, and they didn't want to go back and mess with the coding for the male one. And partly just because of, magical life-saving, lady friend, I guess. I was going to say something ruder, and then I was like, that would definitely bump up the certificate of this video, so I'm just not going to go there. He has a lot of baggage, even for a Persona 3 character. His storyline tackles some very difficult topics, but I feel like it does it in a way that makes it quite approachable. I think that's one of the main strengths of Persona 3, is that it can attack some issues that are quite difficult to cope with in a way that makes them easier. And Shinjiro's storyline is very much typical of that. So there's some other important characters in the game. They're not playable, but they do interact with the storyline in some significant ways. This is not all of the social links. There are more characters that you can go out and rank up with. Please consult a gameplay guide if you want to know more about them. I'm just going to cover some that are iconic or otherwise important to the main story. So Elizabeth and Theodore, their attendants in the Velvet Room. The Velvet Room is a reoccurring location in all 5/6 Persona games. In Persona 3, it really starts to take the form that it's going to take for the rest of modern Persona, which is where the protagonist visits. Igor is there, that's the long-nosed guy you can see in the background picture, and he helps the protagonist to fuse personas to make new ones, get guidance for their journey through the Arcana of a Tarot deck. Elizabeth is very outgoing, and wants to learn about the human world, and really likes her guest, the protagonist. Theodore is more reserved, but he also has his moments. As the female protagonist, you get to pick between them. As the male protagonist, again, you only get Elizabeth, probably because it's an older set of coding and they didn't want to go back and change it. This is Shuji Ikutsuki. He is the member of staff from the school that oversees the club that you're part of that fights the shadow monsters. He used to work at the research facility on the island, the one that exploded, and he says that he wants to try and make things right, so he's helping to share the research with you guys, so that you can defeat these shadows and set things back to the way they were. He's the one who provides all the equipment, he's the one who provides all the guidance on missions, and he's also the one that brings Aigis into the party, because he helped to build her. So this is my favourite of the non-playable characters. His name is Ryoji, and he is the protagonist's soulmate. He's very sweet, he's very kind, he's very considerate. So his social link between the male and the female protagonist is very different, but I really feel like you have to look at both in order to get a decent look in on his character. He approaches them differently because at that point in the storyline they're in very different places in their lives due to some other changes that occur in the female protagonist story. Ryoji sort of adapts based on how the protagonist is feeling. If the protagonist is down, Ryoji will support them. If the protagonist is feeling fine, Ryoji will lean on them. And I quite appreciate that. He also really genuinely does say, I would still like you even if you were a guy, to the female protagonist, and then won't date the male protagonist. I think just because it's older coding, they couldn't go back without spending too much on the redevelopment, or they just didn't want to. But they're definitely quote unquote together. He's really important to the plot. Pay attention to basically everything he says. Almost everything he says has a hidden meaning to it. So make sure you listen. And then you can look back and be like, oh, I understand now, later in the plot. So this is one of the antagonists. He's the leader of the terrorist group Strega. They are rogue persona users who basically use their personas in order for personal gain. They carried out contract killings using their personas by finding people while they're prone in the dark hour and destroying them. He doesn't see anything wrong with what he's doing as far as he's concerned. It's a free country, and if the world's going to end, which he's very sure that it is going to, then they may as well have some fun and make some money in the meantime. He's a bit of a piece of work. He's got a tragic backstory, but so do most of the playable characters, so that's not the problem. It's like a you problem, Takaya, I'm sorry. He claims that he doesn't fear death at all, and he kind of grooms the other Strega members to have the same attitude. You learn a lot more about them and where they came from and what their tragic backstories are throughout the game. So this is Jin. They are also a Strega member. You don't really learn a lot about them, but they are there and they're very devoted to Takaya, so I believe you get to fight them as a boss at some point. Yeah, rest is on the slide. I'm not going to read that out loud, I'm sorry. This is Chidori. She deserved better. She's the most involved member of Strega, I think, and she's also the most interesting to me. She becomes Junpei's love interest, but I didn't really like the storyline. You might do, so I'll try not to dunk on it too much. She's actually an artist, but she's kind of been groomed by Takaya into becoming this sort of battle maiden healer. She wields a chain axe. She has a special power that allows her to give her life energy to other things in order to heal them. Plot happens. I personally think that she's really cool, but her storyline lets her down. You might feel differently. So feel free to observe it yourself and see what you think. So this is the end of the Persona 3 section. So I said I was going to talk a little bit about epilogues and spin-offs. So no matter what version of Persona 3 you play, I recommend you look up the epilogue of Persona 3 FES on YouTube, because the gameplay is notoriously awful and boring, and the story is really important. So I personally recommend that you look it up on YouTube if you're interested, especially if you want to play the female protagonist, because she's only available in Persona 3 Portable, and the epilogue is only available in a different version where you can only play the male protagonist. There is out of continuum spin-off media. Persona 3 Club Book has in-character interviews which take place sort of outside of continuity, but in character, as it were. Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight is much the same. the writing is considered to be consistent with how the characters really are, but the events of the game aren't canon to the main storyline, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, there's no Koro-chan, there's no dog. I really wish they'd let the dog dance. Sad face. Anyway, so each of the modern Persona games focuses primarily on a different location, cast, and storyline. We will see the Persona 3 characters again, but not until the end of the Persona 4 part where I talk about spin-offs and crossovers. So I will see you in the next video, assuming you're not tired of me yet.